The morning sun was just starting to peek over the rocky hills when Mark Rodriguez pulled his Ranger truck into the dusty parking area at the Sonoran Desert Trail. It was 6:30 a.m., and the desert was still cool and peaceful. Mark had been working as a park ranger for 8 years, and he loved these quiet morning patrols before the day hikers arrived. He grabbed his water bottle and radio from the front seat, then started walking along the familiar trail. The desert was beautiful at this time of day. Small lizards scurried across the path, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called out to its pack. Mark breathed in the clean desert air and smiled. This was why he loved his job. About 20 minutes into his walk, something caught his eye. Up ahead, maybe 50 yards away, there was something on the trail that didn't belong. At first, Mark thought someone had dropped their backpack or maybe left some trash behind, but as he got closer, his heart started beating faster. It wasn't gear at all. It was a person. A woman was lying face down on the rocky trail, completely still. Her blonde hair was spread out around her head, and her expensive-looking hiking clothes were dusty and torn. Mark broke into a run, his boots crunching on the desert gravel. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he called out as he reached her. The woman didn't respond. Mark quickly knelt down beside her and gently rolled her over. She appeared to be in her early 40s with an athletic build and the kind of tan that came from spending time outdoors. But her face was pale, and when Mark checked her pulse, it was weak and rapid. That's when he saw it. 2 small puncture wounds on her left ankle, already swollen and discolored. Mark's stomach dropped. Snake bite, and from the look of the swelling, it had happened recently. "Oh no, no, no," Mark muttered under his breath. He'd been trained for this exact situation, but it never got easier when you actually faced it. He immediately reached for his radio. "Base, this is Ranger Rodriguez. I have a medical emergency at mile marker 3 on the Sonoran Trail. Adult female unconscious, appears to be a snakebite victim. I need immediate helicopter evacuation." The crackling voice of his supervisor, Janet, came through the radio. "Copy that, Mark. How long ago do you think the bite occurred?" Mark examined the wound more closely. The swelling extended several inches up her leg, and there were signs that venom was already spreading through her system. "Based on the swelling, I'd say 30 to 45 minutes ago. Her pulse is rapid and weak. She's in serious trouble, Janet. Helicopter is on its way. Head at 45 minutes. Do what you can to keep her stable." 45 minutes. Mark looked down at the unconscious woman and felt a chill despite the warming desert air. In the movies, people always survive snake bites with no problem. But Mark knew the reality was much more dangerous, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. He carefully examined her ankle without touching the bite marks. The swelling was definitely getting worse and her breathing was becoming more shallow. Mark had seen this before, unfortunately. The venom was working its way through her bloodstream, affecting her heart and nervous system. "Come on, stay with me," Mark said softly. He couldn't give her any medication or try to suck out the venom like in old Western movies. Those things actually made snake bites worse. The best thing he could do was keep her still and monitor her condition. The woman's eyes fluttered open for a moment. She looked confused and scared. What happened?" she whispered. "You're okay, ma'am. My name is Mark and I'm a park ranger. You've been bitten by a snake, but help is on the way. Try not to move, okay?" She nodded weakly, then seemed to drift off again. Mark noticed her hiking gear more closely now. Her boots alone probably cost more than he made in a month. Her jacket had some kind of designer logo he didn't recognize, and her watch looked like something you'd see in an expensive magazine ad. But none of that mattered right now. Rich or poor, snake venom didn't care about your bank account. Mark used his radio to give Janet regular updates on the woman's condition. Her pulse was still weak, but steady. The swelling was definitely spreading up her leg, but it seemed to be moving slowly. That was a good sign. "What's your name?" Mark asked when her eyes opened again. "Elena," she said in a hoarse whisper. "Elena Hartwell. I was just hiking. I saw something move in the rocks, and then—" She tried to sit up, but Mark gently pressed her shoulder back down. "Don't try to move, Elena. The venom spreads faster when you're active. Just rest and let me take care of you." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Am I going to die? I can't feel my leg anymore." Mark had dealt with plenty of medical emergencies in his 8 years as a ranger, but it never got easier to see someone so scared. "You're going to be fine. The helicopter will be here soon, and they'll get you to the hospital. The doctors know exactly how to treat snake bites." "I've never been so scared in my life," Elena admitted. "I go hiking out here all the time. I thought I was being careful. The desert can be tricky, Mark said. Snakes like to hide in the shade during the day. You probably just stepped too close to where one was resting. It happens to experienced hikers too. As they waited, Elena drifted in and out of consciousness. During her alert moments, she talked about loving the peace and quiet of the desert. She mentioned something about needing to get back to work for an important meeting. But Mark could tell she was having trouble thinking clearly because of the venom. Finally, Mark heard the beautiful sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. That's our ride, Elena. You're going to be okay. The rescue helicopter landed in a clear area about 100 yards from the trail, kicking up a cloud of desert dust. 2 paramedics jumped out with a stretcher and medical equipment. Mark quickly filled them in on Elena's condition and the timeline of the bite. As they loaded Elena into the helicopter, she grabbed Mark's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my life." "Just doing my job," Mark replied, but he was touched by her gratitude. The helicopter lifted off, carrying Elena toward Phoenix General Hospital. Mark watched until it disappeared over the desert hills, then began the walk back to his truck. He would need to write a detailed report about the incident, and he found himself genuinely hoping that Elena would recover fully. Little did Mark know that this chance encounter with a stranger on a desert trail would completely change both of their lives, in ways he never could have imagined. Mark stood in the swirling dust as the helicopter disappeared into the bright morning sky, carrying Elena toward Phoenix General Hospital. The desert suddenly felt very quiet again, but he couldn't shake the image of her frightened eyes from his mind. In 8 years of being a park ranger, he'd helped with dozens of medical emergencies, but something about this one felt different. He walked back to his truck, but instead of continuing his patrol, Mark found himself sitting behind the wheel, staring at the radio. His supervisor, Janet's voice, crackled through the static. "Mark, how's our snakebite victim doing?" "The paramedics got her stabilized and airborne," Mark replied. "But Janet, the swelling was pretty bad. I think she got a full dose of venom. You did everything right out there. That woman is alive because you found her when you did. Another hour in this heat and it would have been a very different story." Mark nodded even though Janet couldn't see him, but he still felt restless. Something was pulling at him, making it hard to focus on anything else. Maybe it was the way Elena had grabbed his hand before the helicopter took off. Maybe it was how scared she'd looked. Or maybe it was just that he'd never left a rescue situation without knowing how it ended. "Janet, I'm going to head into Phoenix to check on her condition. For the incident report," he said, knowing that wasn't the whole truth. "That's fine, Mark. Take your time." Rodriguez out. The drive to Phoenix General took Mark exactly 57 minutes. He'd made this trip before with other emergency situations, but never with this knot of worry in his stomach. During the drive, he kept thinking about Elena's expensive hiking gear and wondering what her story was. Most people who hiked alone in remote desert areas were either very experienced or very foolish. Elena had seemed like she knew what she was doing, which made the snake bite just bad luck. When Mark arrived at the hospital, he went straight to the emergency department. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and coffee, and was filled with people holding ice packs and crying children. Mark approached the reception desk where a tired-looking nurse was typing on a computer. "I'm Ranger Rodriguez," he said, showing his badge. "I brought in a snakebite victim this morning. Elena Hartwell. I need to check on her condition for my incident report." The nurse looked up from her computer. "Oh yes, the rattlesnake bite. She's in the ICU right now. The doctors are still working on her." "Are you family?" "No, I'm the ranger who found her. I just want to make sure she's okay." The nurse's expression softened. "Have a seat in the waiting room. I'll see if Dr. Martinez can give you an update." Mark found an empty chair next to a vending machine and settled in to wait. The hospital sounds were familiar but still made him nervous. Beeping machines, hushed conversations, the squeak of wheels on linoleum floors. He bought a cup of coffee from the machine and tried to read a magazine. But his mind kept wandering back to Elena lying unconscious on that desert trail. About 30 minutes later, a doctor in scrubs approached him. Dr. Martinez looked like he hadn't slept in days, but his smile was genuine. "You're the ranger who found Miss Hartwell?" Mark stood up and shook the doctor's hand. "Yes, sir." "How is she doing?" Dr. Martinez sat down beside him. "Well, I won't lie to you. She's in serious condition. The snake that bit her delivered a significant amount of venom, and it had time to spread through her system before you found her. But the good news is that you got to her when you did. Another hour, maybe 2, and we might be having a very different conversation. Mark felt his chest tighten. Is she going to be okay? We've given her anti-venom and she's responding well. Her vital signs are stabilizing. The next 24 hours will be crucial, but I'm cautiously optimistic. She's a fighter, that's for sure. Can I see her? Just for a minute? Dr. Martinez studied Mark's face for a moment. Normally, we only allow family members in the ICU, but she's been asking about the ranger who saved her. 5 minutes, okay? Mark followed the doctor through a maze of hallways to the intensive care unit. The ICU was quieter than the emergency department, but somehow more intense. Machines beeped steadily and nurses moved efficiently between rooms. Dr. Martinez led him to room 318 and pushed the door open quietly. Elena was lying in bed connected to several machines, but her eyes were open and alert. When she saw Mark, her face lit up with a weak smile. You came, she said, her voice hoarse but stronger than it had been on the trail. How are you feeling? Mark asked, approaching her bedside carefully. Like I got hit by a truck, Elena said with a small laugh. But the doctors say you saved my life. If you hadn't found me when you did, don't think about that, Mark said. You're going to be fine. The doctor says you're responding well to treatment. Elena looked at him with those same intense eyes he remembered from the desert. I keep thinking about what you said out there, about how the desert can be tricky. I've been hiking those trails for 2 years and I always felt so safe. I guess I got overconfident. It could happen to anyone, Mark said. Even experienced hikers make mistakes. The important thing is that you're okay. They talked quietly for a few minutes. Elena told him more about her love for desert hiking, how she'd started coming out to Arizona after a difficult divorce. The desert helped her think clearly, she said. It was the only place where she could really be alone with her thoughts. Mark found himself sharing more than he usually did with strangers. He told her about growing up in Phoenix, about how he'd always loved the outdoors and how becoming a park ranger had been his dream job since he was a kid. There was something about Elena that made it easy to talk to her. Maybe it was their shared experience from the morning, or maybe it was just her genuine interest in what he had to say. I have to ask, Elena said, her voice getting tired. Do you always follow up on your rescues like this? Mark felt his cheeks get warm. No, actually. I don't. I couldn't stop thinking about whether you were okay. I guess I needed to see for myself. Elena smiled. I'm glad you did. It means a lot to know that someone cares. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway and tapped his watch. Time's up, Ranger. She needs her rest. As Mark started to leave, Elena called out to him. Will you come back tomorrow? If you have time, I mean. I don't have any family here and it gets pretty lonely in this place. Mark turned back and saw something vulnerable in her expression that reminded him of how she'd looked on the desert trail. Of course. I'll stop by after my shift. Walking back to his truck, Mark realized that something had changed in those few minutes in Elena's hospital room. This wasn't just about finishing an incident report anymore. He genuinely cared about this woman he'd found collapsed in the desert, and he wanted to make sure she recovered fully. What Mark didn't know yet was that Elena Hartwell was keeping a very big secret about who she really was, and that this chance meeting would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. Mark kept his promise and returned to the hospital the next day, right after finishing his afternoon patrol. He'd spent most of his shift thinking about Elena and wondering how she was doing. When he walked into room 318, he found her sitting up in bed, looking much better than the day before. Her color had returned and she was awake and alert. You came back, she said with a genuine smile. I wasn't sure if you would. I said I would, Mark replied, pulling up the visitor's chair beside her bed. How are you feeling today? Much better. The doctors say the antivenom is working well. My leg still hurts like crazy, but at least I can feel it again. Yesterday I was worried I might lose it. Mark noticed that Elena's hospital room looked different from the standard rooms he'd seen before. There were fresh flowers on the windowsill and she had her own private television. A basket of expensive-looking fruit sat on the rolling table, along with what appeared to be gourmet coffee. Looks like you've got some people who care about you, Mark said, gesturing toward the flowers. Elena glanced at the arrangements with a slightly embarrassed expression. My assistant sent those, and my business partner. They're probably worried sick that I'm not answering my phone. I haven't told them exactly what happened yet. What kind of work do you do? Mark asked, settling into the chair. Elena hesitated for just a moment. I run a technology company. Nothing too exciting. Lots of meetings and paperwork. What about you? Have you always wanted to be a park ranger? Mark could tell she was changing the subject, but he didn't push. Pretty much since I was a kid. My dad used to take me camping in the desert every summer. I loved everything about it. The wildlife, the plants, the way the whole ecosystem works together. When I found out you could get paid to protect places like that, it seemed like the perfect job. That's amazing, Elena said, and Mark could hear the genuine interest in her voice. So many people hate their jobs. You're lucky to have found something you're passionate about. They talked for over an hour about everything and nothing. Mark found Elena surprisingly easy to talk to. She asked thoughtful questions about his work, laughed at his stories about dealing with difficult tourists, and seemed genuinely fascinated by his knowledge of desert wildlife. When visiting hours ended, Mark realized he hadn't thought about the time at all. The next day, Mark arrived to find Elena's room even more transformed. A second television had been wheeled in, and there were now 3 different flower arrangements. A man in an expensive suit was leaving as Mark approached the door. "Friend of yours?" Mark asked as he entered. Elena rolled her eyes. "My lawyer. He flew in from Los Angeles this morning. Everyone keeps treating me like I'm dying or something. It's sweet, but honestly, it's a bit overwhelming." Mark noticed that Elena's hospital gown had been replaced with silk pajamas that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget. A leather briefcase sat on the chair, and several important-looking documents were spread across her bedside table. "Looks like you've got work following you even into the hospital," he said. "Unfortunately, yes. I have some big decisions to make, and apparently they can't wait until I'm back on my feet. But enough about that boring stuff. Tell me more about your environmental education idea." Mark was surprised she remembered their conversation from the day before. He'd mentioned wanting to create educational programs for kids visiting the desert parks, but he hadn't expected her to be interested in the details. "It's probably just a pipe dream," Mark said, "but I keep thinking about how many kids visit the park and leave without really understanding what they've seen. They see rocks and cacti, but they don't realize they're looking at one of the most complex ecosystems on Earth." Elena leaned forward, suddenly very focused. "What would you need to make it happen?" "Money mostly," Mark said with a laugh. "And time. I'd need to develop curricula, train staff, maybe build some kind of visitor center. It would take years and probably hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like I said, pipe dream." "Maybe not as impossible as you think," Elena said quietly, but before Mark could ask what she meant, Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway. "Good news," the doctor announced. "Your blood work looks excellent. We're going to move you out of the ICU tomorrow, and if everything continues to improve, you might be going home by the weekend." After Dr. Martinez left, Elena seemed quieter than usual. Mark could tell something was on her mind. "Are you worried about going home?" he asked. Elena sighed. "Home is Los Angeles, 3 hours away. I was thinking, I don't really want to go back yet. I mean, I know I have to eventually, but there's something about being here that feels right. Does that sound crazy?" "Not at all," Mark said. "Sometimes a near-death experience makes you see things differently. Maybe you need some time to process what happened." "Exactly," Elena said. "Plus, I've really enjoyed our conversations. I don't have many people in my life who I can just talk to like this. Most people want something from me, or they're trying to impress me, or—" She stopped herself. "Sorry, that sounds really stuck up." Mark studied her face. There was something Elena wasn't telling him, something bigger than just running a technology company, but he could also see that whatever it was, it made her lonely. "It doesn't sound stuck up," he said. "It sounds honest." On his third visit, Mark brought Elena something he'd never given to anyone before. It was a small piece of petrified wood he'd found during his first year as a ranger. He'd kept it on his desk at home as a reminder of why he loved his job. "I can't accept this," Elena said when he handed her the smooth, beautiful stone. "It's too special." "I want you to have it," Mark said, "as a reminder that you survived something that could have killed you. And maybe as a reminder of the desert that brought us together." Elena held the stone up to the light, admiring the way the minerals inside caught the afternoon sun streaming through the window. "It's beautiful." "Thank you, Mark. This means more to me than you know." That evening, as Mark drove home, he realized something important was happening. In just 3 days, Elena had become more than just someone he'd rescued. She was becoming a friend, maybe even something more, though he tried not to think about that too much. The differences in their backgrounds were obvious, even if Elena downplayed them. But when he was with her, those differences didn't seem to matter. They talked and laughed like old friends. Elena was curious about his world, and she shared stories about her love for hiking and her struggles with finding genuine connections in her life. Mark had no idea that Elena was fighting her own internal battle. Every day she wanted to tell him the truth about who she really was. But she was afraid that once he knew about her wealth and success, everything would change. For the first time in years, someone liked her for just being herself, not for what she could do for them. Neither of them realized that their growing connection was about to be tested in a way that would force all their secrets into the open. Friday afternoon arrived faster than either Mark or Elena had expected. Dr. Martinez had cleared her for discharge, and Elena was finally getting dressed in real clothes for the first time in 4 days. Mark sat in the visitor's chair, watching her pack the few personal items she'd accumulated during her stay. "I still can't believe how fast you recovered," Mark said. "The doctors were worried about permanent nerve damage, and here you are walking around like nothing happened." Elena smiled as she carefully placed the petrified wood he'd given her into a small velvet pouch. "Clean living and good genes, I guess. Plus having a good friend to keep my spirits up didn't hurt." The word friend hung in the air between them. Over the past 4 days, their relationship had grown into something deeper than friendship, though neither of them had said it out loud. Mark found himself thinking about Elena constantly when he wasn't at the hospital, and the way she looked at him suggested she felt the same way. "So what happens now?" Mark asked. "Back to Los Angeles and your technology company?" Elena paused in her packing. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. I don't have to rush back immediately. I could stay in Phoenix for a while, maybe find a hotel nearby and take things slow. The doctors said I should avoid strenuous activity for at least another week." Mark felt his heart skip a beat. "You'd really want to stay here?" "There are things in Phoenix I'm not ready to leave behind yet," Elena said, looking directly at him. Before Mark could respond, there was a knock on the hospital room door. A woman in her 30s wearing a press badge entered, followed by a man carrying a large camera. "Ms. Hartwell, I'm Lisa Chen from Channel 12 News. We'd like to do a story about your rescue. We understand a local park ranger saved your life after a rattlesnake bite." It's exactly the kind of positive story our viewers love. Mark felt confused. How did the news station even know about Elena's accident? Most medical emergencies didn't make the evening news unless someone famous was involved. "I really don't think that's necessary," Elena said quickly, but the reporter was already setting up. "Oh, come on. It'll just take a few minutes. Our viewers would love to hear how Ranger—" The reporter looked at Mark. "What's your name, sir?" "Mark Rodriguez," he said automatically. "Perfect. They'd love to hear how Ranger Rodriguez heroically saved the life of Elena Hartwell, the CEO of Hartwell Sustainable Technologies." Mark felt the words hit him like a physical blow. "CEO?" He looked at Elena, whose face had gone pale. The reporter continued, oblivious to the tension in the room. "For those who don't know, Ms. Hartwell's company revolutionized solar panel technology and is worth over $200 million. She's been featured on Forbes magazine's list of America's most successful entrepreneurs 3 times. Mark stared at Elena in shock. $200 million? Forbes magazine? The woman he'd been visiting every day, the woman he'd been falling for, was one of the most successful business people in America? Ms. Hartwell is also known for her environmental advocacy and philanthropy," the reporter went on. "Just last year, she donated $15 million to conservation causes. This rescue story is perfect because it combines her love for nature with real human drama." Elena looked like she wanted to disappear. "Please, I really don't want to do an interview right now. I'm still recovering." But the camera operator had already started filming. "Just a few quick questions. Ms. Hartwell, what was going through your mind when you realized you'd been bitten by a rattlesnake?" Mark felt overwhelmed. He stood up abruptly and walked toward the window, trying to process what he'd just learned. Elena Hartwell wasn't just wealthy. She was incredibly wealthy. She was famous. She was the kind of person who got written about in magazines and had her donations to charity make headlines. "And Ranger Rodriguez," the reporter called out, "how does it feel to know you saved the life of someone who's made such a significant impact on environmental causes? It's almost like fate brought you two together." Mark turned around to look at Elena. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Fear, embarrassment, pleading. I had no idea who she was, Mark said quietly. I just saw someone who needed help. That's what makes this story so beautiful, the reporter gushed. A humble park ranger saves a millionaire businesswoman, and neither of them knew what an incredible partnership this could lead to. Ms. Hartwell, have you considered supporting Ranger Rodriguez's conservation work? I'm sure our viewers would love to know if this rescue has inspired any new environmental initiatives. Elena looked stricken. We haven't discussed anything like that. Mark felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. Everything made sense now. The expensive hiking gear, the private hospital room, the constant stream of flowers and visitors in expensive suits, the way Elena had seemed so interested in his environmental education ideas. She probably thought he was some kind of charity case. Excuse me, Mark said, his voice sounding strange even to himself. I need to go. He walked quickly toward the door, ignoring the reporter's questions about getting a follow-up interview. In the hallway, he could hear Elena calling his name, but he didn't stop. He needed air. He needed space to think. Mark made it to the hospital parking lot before Elena caught up with him. She was moving carefully because of her injured leg, but she'd managed to follow him outside. Mark, please wait, she called out. He stopped walking, but didn't turn around. $200 million, Elena? Forbes magazine? And you let me sit there talking about my little environmental education program, like it was some big dream. It is a big dream, Elena said, finally reaching him. And it's a good dream. That's why I was interested in it. Mark finally turned to face her. Were you laughing at me this whole time? The poor park ranger with his cute little ideas about teaching kids to appreciate nature? No! Elena's voice was sharp with emotion. It was never like that, never. Then why didn't you tell me who you were? Mark asked. 4 days, Elena. 4 days of me bringing you little gifts and telling you about my life, and you couldn't be honest with me about yours? Elena's eyes filled with tears. Because I was afraid of exactly this. I was afraid that once you knew about the money and the company and all of it, you'd see me differently. People always do. Maybe because when someone lies to you for 4 days, it changes things, Mark said. I didn't lie to you, Elena said desperately. I told you I ran a technology company. I didn't tell you how big it was. Mark looked at her standing there in her designer clothes that probably cost more than his monthly salary, and felt like he didn't know her at all. Does this change how you see me? She asked quietly. Does knowing about my money make me a different person than I was yesterday? Mark was quiet for a long moment. The honest answer was yes, it did change things. Not because Elena was a bad person, but because the distance between their worlds felt impossibly wide. How could a park ranger who lived paycheck to paycheck have anything in common with someone who donated more money to charity in a year than he'd make in his entire lifetime? I don't know, he said finally. I need some time to think about this. Elena nodded, though he could see it hurt her. I understand. But Mark, please remember that everything between us was real. Every conversation, every laugh, every moment. That was me, not the CEO or the millionaire. Just me. Mark walked away without another word, leaving Elena standing alone in the hospital parking lot. Neither of them knew that this painful revelation was actually the beginning of something that would transform both their lives in ways they never could have imagined. 3 weeks passed without any contact between Mark and Elena. Mark threw himself into his work, spending long days patrolling the desert trails and trying not to think about the woman who had turned his world upside down. But everywhere he went reminded him of her. The spot where he'd found her. The hospital where they'd talked for hours. Even the piece of petrified wood on his desk at home, which he'd meant to give her, seemed to mock him. His supervisor, Janet, noticed the change in him immediately. You've been like a ghost around here, she said one afternoon as Mark returned from patrol. Want to talk about what's eating at you? Mark had never told Janet about his visits to Elena or the feelings that had developed between them. The whole situation felt too complicated to explain. Just tired, I guess. This wouldn't have anything to do with that snakebite victim from a few weeks back, would it? The one who turned out to be some big-shot businesswoman? Mark looked up in surprise. How did you know about that? Janet smiled knowingly. Mark, you followed up on that rescue more than any other in your 8 years here. Then suddenly you're acting like someone broke your heart. Doesn't take a detective to figure it out. That same day, Mark's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, a professional-sounding woman introduced herself as Catherine, Elena's assistant. Ms. Hartwell asked me to call you, Catherine said. She wanted you to know that she's decided to relocate her company's headquarters to Phoenix. She said you'd understand why. Mark felt his chest tighten. She's moving here? The transition is already underway. She's also asked me to let you know about a donation that was made to the Arizona Parks Foundation this morning. $500,000 for environmental education programs. Mark nearly dropped the phone. $500,000? The donation came with specific instructions that it be used to develop educational curricula for desert wildlife preservation, with preference given to programs designed by current park rangers. Ms. Hartwell thought you might be interested in applying. After Catherine hung up, Mark stared at his phone for a long time. Elena had not only moved her entire company to Phoenix, but she'd also funded his dream project. And she'd done it all without asking for anything in return, without even speaking to him. Over the next few days, Mark found himself driving past the address Catherine had given him for Elena's new office building. It was a beautiful modern structure on the outskirts of Phoenix, with solar panels covering the roof and desert landscaping that looked like it belonged in the environment rather than fighting against it. One evening, Mark finally worked up the courage to visit. The building was mostly empty at 7 p.m., but he could see lights on in one of the upper floors. The security guard in the lobby called up to Elena's office and nodded for Mark to go ahead. Mark found Elena working alone in a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the desert. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like the woman he'd met on the hiking trail than the CEO from the news report. "I heard you moved your company here," Mark said from the doorway. Elena looked up from her computer, and Mark could see the surprise and hope in her eyes. "I did. Phoenix is a better location for the work we're doing, more sun for solar panel testing, and the donation to the Parks Foundation." Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the desert landscape. "I believe in environmental education. I always have. The fact that someone I care about has a vision for improving it just made the decision easier." Mark stepped into the office. "Elena, I need to apologize. The way I reacted at the hospital wasn't fair to you." "You don't need to apologize," Elena said, turning to face him. "I should have been honest with you from the beginning. I was scared, but that's not an excuse for letting you think I was someone I'm not." "But that's just it," Mark said. "You are exactly who I thought you were. The woman who loves hiking alone in the desert. The person who asks thoughtful questions and laughs at my terrible jokes. The fact that you're also successful in business doesn't change any of that." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I was so afraid you'd see me differently. Most people do once they know about the money. They either want something from me or they treat me like I'm not a real person anymore." Mark walked closer to her. "I'll admit it was overwhelming at first. The idea that someone like you could be interested in someone like me seemed impossible, but these past 3 weeks without you made me realize something important." "What's that?" "I don't care how much money you have or how successful your company is. I care about the woman who grabbed my hand in that helicopter and said thank you. I care about the person who wanted to hear about my environmental education ideas and made me feel like they mattered. That's who you are to me." Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've missed you so much, Mark. These have been the longest 3 weeks of my life." Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out the piece of petrified wood he'd been carrying around. "I brought you something. I meant to give this to you at the hospital, but then everything got complicated." Elena took the stone and held it up to the light from the window. "It's beautiful." "What is it?" "It's from the first trail I ever patrolled as a ranger. I've carried it with me ever since as a reminder of why I love what I do. I want you to have it now as a reminder that some things are worth holding on to, even when they seem complicated." Elena closed her fingers around the stone and smiled. "I have something for you too." She walked to her desk and picked up a folder. "The Parks Foundation approved your application for the Environmental Education Grant. They want you to develop a comprehensive program for 3 different desert locations. It's a full-time position with a salary that's triple what you're making now." Mark stared at the folder in amazement. "Elena, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not from me," Elena said firmly. "It's from the Arizona Parks Foundation. They reviewed dozens of applications and chose yours because it was the best one. I may have provided the funding, but you earned the position." 6 months later, Mark's Desert Guardian environmental education program was operating in 3 Arizona state parks. He'd quit his job as a ranger to focus full-time on developing curricula, training staff, and teaching children about the complex ecosystems of the Sonoran Desert. Elena had also made significant changes in her life. She'd moved Hartwell Sustainable Technologies to Phoenix permanently, and had started spending her weekends hiking the desert trails with Mark, exploring new locations for potential educational sites. Their relationship had grown stronger through the challenges they'd faced. They'd learned to navigate the differences in their backgrounds and to appreciate what each brought to the partnership. Elena's business experience helped Mark expand his program more effectively, while Mark's passion for conservation influenced Elena's company to develop new eco-friendly technologies. On the one-year anniversary of Elena's snakebite, Mark took her back to the exact spot where he'd found her on that desert trail. As they stood together watching the sunrise over the rocky hills, Mark pulled out a simple silver ring. "I know this is where everything started for us," he said, dropping to one knee. "The place where we first met. I thought it would be fitting to ask you here if you'd like to spend the rest of your life creating new adventures together." Elena laughed and cried at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." As Mark slipped the ring onto her finger, Elena thought about how strange life could be. A moment that could have ended in tragedy had instead led to the greatest happiness she'd ever known. She'd nearly died on this trail, but in many ways, it was also where her real life had begun. Their engagement announcement made headlines, not because of Elena's wealth or Mark's humble background, but because their story reminded people that the most meaningful connections often come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to realize what matters most. Mark and Elena's story became proof that love doesn't care about bank accounts or social status. It only cares about two people who are brave enough to be honest with each other and strong enough to fight for something worth keeping.